Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin Daf Mem. We're starting the fifth chapter, which we're going to finish very, very quickly. I think it's 3 pages long. And today we're going to learn all the Mishnayot of the chapter, which seems to be a common theme in Sanhedrin. We seem to be having that the Gemara, kind of the way that our printed Gemara is organized, is all the Mishnayot are at the beginning. I'm not sure why that is. Okay, with that, we'll get started. Today's daf is sponsored by Chavi Khan and Heshi Kaufman in loving memory of their father, Yisrael ben Yoshua Heschel, on his first yurtzeit. Today's daf is dedicated in honor of the four Tetzbetaniot that were released yesterday from captivity, Liri, Naama, Karina, and Daniela. We continue to pray for the safe release of all the other hostages. Okay, we're going to get started. I will mention that for those interested in a Hebrew class, we have a Hebrew class, a skills class starting next Wednesday with Rabbanit Michelle Farber. The topic is Chiyuv Nashim in Tefillah. So, I'm sorry, Chiyuvei Nashim in various sugyot from Masechet Brachot, including Tefillah, Kriyat Shema, Kiddush, Birkat Hamazon, Zimun. Those will be the topics covered by the class. It's a 4-week class with Chavruta. It's on Zoom, but then will also be available digitally for anybody who wants to take the course. It's a good opportunity, again, for those who Hebrew skills are good, to learn how to do more in-depth learning, how to learn on your own. Perhaps we'll be able to offer an English one in parallel later on this year, but no commitments yet. We'll see how things go. Okay. We're going to start now with our Mishnah. Hayu bodkim oto b'sheva chakirot. We now get into how do we check the witnesses in capital punishments, okay? Capital crimes. So we check the witnesses with 7 chakirot. We're going to learn there's chakirot, there's bedikot. Some of the Mishnayot we're going to read right now, we've actually quoted parts of them before because we already dealt with these issues, but now we're going to see them from the Mishnah. There's 7 questions we ask. Here are the 7 main central questions. Be'ezeh shavua. Okay, shavua usually in Hebrew means week. In the Gemara or the Mishnah, it usually doesn't mean week. It means which set of Shemitah. Okay, there were 7 Shmitas before every Jubilee year. Which of the 7 are we in? Okay, are we in the first Shemitah of the Jubilee until the Jubilee year, the second set of 7 years, the third set of 7 years? When did the event happen? We want to date it within a 50-year range. Okay, we want to know which of the Shmitas was it in? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. Be'ezo shana, which of the 7 years in that particular Shemitah cycle was it? Be'ezeh chodesh, what month did it happen? Bekama b'chodesh, what was the date of the month? Be'ezeh yom. Okay, this already raises our first question, which is what day of the week? Well, if you know what the date is, you know what day of the week is, why do you have to say both, right? Theoretically, you just look at a calendar and figure out. So first of all, a bunch of things about the sugya today are going to give us indications for how the way they related to time and dates was kind of different than the way we do, right? Everyone nowadays, if you don't, you can open a calendar within, if you have a smartphone, it's very easy. You have a calendar, you know exactly what day of the week, which date came on, right? Happened on. So they obviously did not have calendars and they didn't keep track of things the way we do. Or perhaps they did and they knew the days of them. They clearly kept track of dates. It's not like they didn't keep track of dates. But if you're talking about witnesses who witnessed an event, they might not remember exactly what date it happened on. They might remember what day of the week. Okay, it might be something that's easier, so we do both. That way we kind of cover, because what's the issue here? And this maybe I should say before, because it's important. The reason you need all these chakirot, and Rashi says it explicitly, shekol hasheva halalu, even though we haven't gotten through all 7, ba'ot lahavian lidei hazaman. You have to have testimony that could potentially be canceled by edim zomim, right? Edim hamizimim, that make you into edim zomimim. What are edim zomimim? We've gone over this a few times, which is edim zomimim is people who say, but we were with you on that day and that time and that place. So we were there somewhere else, not in that place that you said you were. We were somewhere else with you. So we need to have an opportunity for someone to come along and say, wait, you said it was Sunday, right? If people hear it was on December 30th, they might not remember, oh, that was a Sunday, and they might not remember, oh, I was with them on Sunday, but they might remember I was with them on Sunday. So remembering the day of the week is a good way to remember when something happened. And you could even say nowadays it would be true, because you don't always remember. Now it's true, you could always check the dates. But if you hear someone testifying about an event, you won't necessarily remember I was with them on that day. But if they say it was a Sunday at the last week in December, that'll click and you'll say, oh yeah, that Sunday I was also with them. So that's why you need both those, even though theoretically you could figure out what's what, which day it happened without them saying it. Be'ezo sha'a, what hour, and be'ezo makom, and what day, what location. So those are the important questions, right? All of them are related really to time other than the last one, which is also location, because again, you can't turn them into Edim Zomim without saying, but we were with you somewhere else. Rabbi Yosi Omer, second opinion here. Be'ezo yom, be'ezo shah, be'ezo makom. He says you only need the last three. You need what day of the week, what hour, and what place. That's all you need. Okay? It's a little strange. What about the month and all that? But we'll see what he's talking about at the end of today's daf. Mikirim atemoto. Okay, the next section is a little bit confusing because we said there's 7 chakirot, 7 central questions, and those are the main questions. Then we get into bedikot. Bedikot, we're going to learn the difference between chakirot and bedikot, but they're not essential, basically. So now we have this seemingly essential questions, but they're not part of the 7. So how do we explain this? We're going to see. Mikirim atemoto, do you know who he is? Now, do you recognize him? Who is him? Is him the murderer or is him the one who was murdered? Okay, now we seem to be talking about a murder case in this question. And it seems most of the commentaries say we're talking about, do you recognize the person who was murdered? And the question really is, and we're going to see this later in a Braita, which expands on this, is were they Jewish or not Jewish? Because the death penalty is only for one who kills a Jew, not for one who kills someone who's not Jewish. So you have to identify that, but you would call that a pretty essential question, right? You can't kill the person without knowing that they killed someone who you'd be deserving of the death penalty if they had killed them. So is this a drish? Is it a chakira? Is it not? Right? It's a big question. And hitreitembo, did you warn the person? Now, also warning. If the person wasn't warned, you can't give them the death penalty. So I'll learn about warning later, but that's also very basic. So the Ran quotes a few different possibilities of how to explain this. Okay, we said until now there's drishot, chakirot and bedikot. So some people say there's a third category called drishot that aren't mentioned in the Mishnah by name, but that's what these are. These are drishot. They're important, but they're not the things that can make you huzam because they're not date, time, place, all that. Perhaps the third category. Some people actually put in chakirot and some people put in bedikot, and then each one has to explain. And it's not the purpose of our shiur today to get into all that, but you should just know there's a big deliberation about how to treat these questions, these extra questions. Also, some more extra questions. How veda avodah zarah? In case of someone worshiping idols, then you also need to ask these questions, which is et mi avad ube me avad. What God was this person worshiping, and how did they worship the God? We're going to see later, there's 4 possibilities. Did they offer a sacrifice? All sorts of things. We'll get to it later. So again, either this is the end of chakirot, or perhaps we already went to bedikot because those are possible bedikot. We don't know. But anyway, now they say, if you ask a lot of bedikot, that's better, right? This sounds like Pesach, right? Right? It's a good thing to do. The more the better. Okay? Ask lots of bedikot. Ask lots of questions, because what do we want to do? We want to make sure that the witnesses aren't contradicting each other. So ask, what was the color of the shirt? Remember we learned what was ask as many questions as you can to see that their story jives. And we're going to see in a minute what knocks things out when it comes to bedikot. Maseu badag, and they bring an example. Maseu badak ben zakai be'uktzei te'enim. Okay, he checked the stems of the fig tree that was somehow in the scene of the crime, and were the stems this type of stem, that type of stem? Okay, we have, that seems like a very, very minor detail, and yet he asked them that question. Now you'll see, what if they didn't know and they didn't pay attention? So they say, I don't know. But the problem is if they say it was like this and and the other one said it was like that, then we're going to have a problem. Ma ben chakirot lebedikot. So what's the difference? Okay, we're categorizing them. Why are we categorizing them? If you don't know what day it was, what time it happened, what place it happened, you don't know one of those essential questions, then edutan is canceled. Okay, there's no testimony without, like I said, it has to have potential for someone to come along and make the edim zomimim. If you don't have that potential, then we won't accept your testimony. It's a very interesting concept, right? That in order for it to be testimony, it has to be testimony that can be contradicted potentially. If it can't be contradicted because you didn't give some of the important details, well, then we don't accept it. But bedikot, if one person says, I didn't know, or even if both witnesses don't know, then edutan kayemet, it's fine. Because if they both say we don't know, we accept the testimony. It's not like they have to have paid attention to those details. But chakirot, bedikot, but they're similar in the sense that bisman shemaklishim zeh et zeh edutam b'telah. But if they actually contradict each other, and one says the shirt was red and one says the shirt was white, then we cancel their testimony. Echad omer b'shnayim b'chodesh, ve'echad omer b'shlosha b'chodesh. Okay, now we're going to talk about if one says it was the second day of the month and one said it was the third day of the month, and they have a disagreement about the date. So you would think clear contradiction. But no, because like we said, they didn't have calendars in those days in the way that we did. And therefore, what might happen? Well, maybe they didn't know that the month was a 30-day month. In other words, if it's a 30-day month or a 29-day month, that's going to affect which date is the second or the third of the month. So it could be, and I think they specifically chose an example toward the beginning of the month where not everyone necessarily had heard already when the new moon was declared and when the Rosh Chodesh was declared. And therefore, they might get confused and they might be talking about the exact same date. And maybe, by the way, there's another good reason to have the day of the week, right? If you say Sunday, well, then we know you were talking about the same day, even though one called it the second of the month and one called it the third of the month. But obviously, if one said 3 and one said 5, well, that can't be, right? There's no possibility that the new moon was declared 2 days later and that there was a discrepancy of 2 days, because again, it's always either a 29-day month or a 30-day month, and therefore, there's a clear contradiction here. Okay, now talking about margin of error here, here's a very famous sugya, and it appears also in Psachim, where also we were talking about hours there. And they quote our Mishnah, Echad omer b'shtei shaot, ve'echad omer b'shalosh shaot. If one said it happened 2 hours into the day, and one said it happened 3 hours into the day, okay? So let's say a day that starts at 6 and ends at 6. So we're talking about one said it happened at 8 and one said it happened at 9. Edutan kayemet. We assume, now the simple reading of this, okay, there happen to be 3 explanations of this in the Gemara and Psachim, but the simple reading of this is that, again, without watches, without telephones that tell you exactly what time it is, that, even if you have a watch, most people walk around with telephones. Without that, you can make a mistake. What's the margin of error that we assume is normal, right? You can make a mistake between 8 and 9 in the morning because who can pay attention exactly when you're based on the sun, where the sun is in the sky, whether it's 8, whether it's 9, it's something that people can confuse. And therefore, they might actually be talking about the same event that happened in the exact same moment. But according to Tanakama, 2 hours, people don't mistake. Okay? People don't say 9 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning. People know the difference between 9 and 11. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kayemet. Rabbi Yehuda says even 9 and 11 people confuse. But what 2 hours won't they confuse? Echad Omer b'chamesh ve'echad Omer b'sheva edutam b'telah. But if you say 5 hours into the day, which is 11 in the morning, or 7 hours into the day, which is 1 in the afternoon, that for sure, because the difference between morning and afternoon is clear. Because why? Okay, if you don't know this, it's obvious. Shebechamesh chama b'mizrach u'b'sheva chama b'ma'arav. Right? The sun moves sides between noon. That's the whole idea of noon. So therefore, everybody knows which side of the sky it's on and can tell the difference between morning and afternoon. So if there's a 2-hour discrepancy between an hour before noon and an hour after noon, for sure, we're going to assume that's contradictory testimony. I'll mention right now, because we're going to get back to it later, and I won't get into all the details because we'll never finish the daf, but there's a machloket about how to understand this. 2 different versions of Abai and one answer of Rava about what the machloket is and really what the opinion of Tanakama is. And there's some people think that Tanakama thinks that with the 2 and 3, actually there's no error at all. People don't make mistakes. People know exactly what the time is. But what? When it's, let's say, 8 in the morning, okay, 8 and 1 minute, you might call that 2 hours into the day, and I might call it 3 hours into the day because we've already entered the 3rd hour. And we're actually talking about the exact same thing. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is that we might err by a few minutes. And let's say, just a few minutes though. So let's say it happened at 7:58. And right, I think maybe it happened at 8:03. So I'll call that, okay, maybe that was a bad example. It should really be 8:50, okay? 8:53, 7:03, okay? Or something like that. Some 5-minute difference, let's say. So, I'm sorry, 9:03. Okay, we're talking 8, 9 because we're talking 2 and 3 hours. Sorry, I'm getting confused. So if we say 8:59 or 9:02, you'll call that 9 o'clock and I'll call it 8 o'clock because it's still 8. So again, that could create this difference where we're actually talking about the same thing or pretty much the same thing. It's just with a small variation. Rava's interpretation is actually different, that people could err up to like an hour plus, okay? And then he explains it based on that hour plus, okay? But without getting into how everyone explains it, just understand that there's a machloket, which we're going to touch on later, about whether people don't make mistakes at all is one opinion, and it's just we're using different language to say the same thing. Or they make minor mistakes, and it could be a bit before the hour, a bit after the hour, but we're really talking about the same basic time. Or there's a discrepancy of like a bigger amount of time. Okay. And that's that people could err up to an hour in something. And then he has a unique way of explaining the machloket, which we're not going to get into right now. Okay. So that's other possibilities of understanding this machloket. I wouldn't have mentioned them all other than, first of all, it is a basic interesting sugya. And it does get to this fascinating question of margin of error. And is there a margin of error? Is there not? And if there is, how much of? And that's a super interesting topic. And the Gemara is going to touch on it later. Okay, so that's the end of the bedikot and the chakirot that we discussed. What are the 7 chakirot? We talked about these additional questions that perhaps are chakirot, perhaps are classified as bedikot. We talked about it's always good to add as many bedikot as you can. Then we talked about what the difference is and what's similar about chakirot and bedikot in terms of contradicting, in terms of not knowing and all that. And then we had this issue of if there's some sort of discrepancy, what discrepancy will we accept when it comes to time and what won't we? And again, that really is very based on their understand, the way time was in their day. Okay, which again could be relevant somewhat today, could not be relevant somewhat today, right? How much do people pay attention to time when they see an event, they witness something, do we assume they looked at their watch and marked it down and know exactly, or they know, somewhat when it is, and that's another. Even today, it could be still relevant. Okay, then we bring in the second witness. Now, what's funny about this is we started with Hayubot Kinotan. We would check them. And it never said we brought in one of the witnesses, but remember, we already discussed before, the first they bring in one witness, so then they say, okay, now we're going to go back to the process. And again, we talked about this a long time ago, which is these Mishnayot are descriptive. They're similar to Yoma when it described what the Kohen Gadol did on the day of Erev Yom, starting from the week before Yom Kippur to the day of Yom Kippur. Then we had Arvei Pesachim, where they talk about what they would do at the Seder. As opposed to, it's not, this is what should be done. It's partly what should be done, but also partly describing a process. So now they're in the process and they say, okay, let's go on in the process. So that we all did with one witness. Now we're going to move to the second witness. So we bring in the second one. Ubot Kinoton, we ask them. Right? We ask the same questions to the other witness. If everything jives, everything works out, lines up, putchim b'schut. Then we start the Masao Matan, the judges start their deliberations. And then we start with schut. Remember, we said, here's the agenda to try to acquit the murderer or the person who's liable for the death penalty. Let's try to see if there's some way to exonerate them. And this we learned already. If one of the witnesses come and say, I have something good to say, and they're right after the witnesses just said they're liable for murder, right? They're liable for the death penalty, whatever it is. So now, wait, I have something good to say about them. We don't accept that because remember, we said they're no gea b'davar because maybe they're just trying to make sure the psak din never happens so that, because if they lied, right, they want to not get the punishment and they won't get the punishment if the person is never convicted, right? Because the punishment of Eidim Zomimim, yes, you'll be called an Eid Zomim, but you won't get the punishment unless the psak din actually happens. Or one of the students come and says, I have to say something bad about this person. We don't let one of the students. Remember, these are people who are not on the court. These are the ones sitting in the rows in front of the judges. Mishatkinoto, we silence. Okay, so we won't accept the Eidim to say anything, not l'schut, not l'chova, and we don't accept the students to say anything bad. But Amar Chamin Yesh Lamed Alav Schut, if one of the students comes forward and says, wait, I have some reason to acquit this person, Ma'alim oto u'moshivin oto beinehem, this part we didn't see. We saw that we accept it, but now they say not only that, we bring him up to sit with the judges. We sit him among the judges. We leave them in there for the entire day. And if there's something truth to what he's saying and it sounds right, then we listen to him. Even the defendant himself, if the defendant, him or herself, says, I have something to say for my own right to exonerate me, as long as it's substantial. If it doesn't have substance to it, obviously not. But if it's substantial and it's meaningful, then we can accept it. You can even, right, it's like saying, nowadays the lawyer will come and make a claim for you. So we can accept it. Okay, moving on forward. So we started with the chakirot and the bedikot. Then we went to the deliberations. Said who is allowed to say something in the deliberations besides the judges. What can be said, what can't be said, what we accept, what we won't accept. From who, yes, from who, no. Now we get to, okay, they want to take a vote now. If they say this person's innocent, so we say, okay, you can go home, we're done. If not, we wait till tomorrow. Remember, halanat adin. Like I said, we're going to review a lot of things today. Excuse me for a minute. We push it off till tomorrow, but we didn't see this before. You assume, okay, everybody goes home and we're done. And we come back in the morning and start up again. But now it says, no. They continue to discuss, just not necessarily in the court or not necessarily in the forum with everybody. Mizdavgim zugot. They would pair them up. And some people say it doesn't necessarily mean only two, it could be three. They break the 23 judges up into smaller groups in order to continue discussing it. Okay, sometimes it's better to discuss in a smaller group and to continue deliberating. They would not eat a lot because eating makes you fall asleep. And they wouldn't drink wine because that makes you not think clearly. And then they would really work all night. Okay, what this means all night, I assume they wouldn't stay up all night long, but they would stay up till late in the night. And then they come early in the morning back to the court. And then they start voting, okay? But before they vote, what do? Remember we said, we quoted this before. The one who said, I think this person's not guilty, I was the one who said this yesterday, and I stand in my position. This is why I said it's a descriptive Mishnah, because this doesn't necessarily happen. They might have changed their mind, okay? But remember, the one who said Mizakeh can't change his mind. But this isn't necessarily, because the one who said, I thought the person should be guilty, can say, and I stand in my position, or if they want, they could change it, okay? But assuming what they're saying is, let's imagine a scenario where everybody stays in their positions. And then here we have it, what I just mentioned, which is a person who said, I think the person's guilty, can now switch to innocent and start arguing that case. But if you said yesterday, I think the person's innocent, you can't change your position today now. If you remember, we explained this according to Rav, only during the deliberations. You can't change your position. And that would prove there are deliberations that go on day 2. In the voting, remember, Rav said you could change your position. Okay, he understood, and it's not clear everybody holds that way, but he was the main position we brought, that of course, when it comes to voting, you could. We had some questions on him, but seems like in the vote, you can change your position. What if they got confused and they didn't remember what they said the previous day? Remember, everything was recorded, so we pull out the what they said, and they remind everyone, the scribes. Okay, so now if they vote, they find he's innocent, they let him go. And if not, in other, I think matzula zchut means if they find some fact that basically means this really wasn't a case, then they throw them out. You'd say we said 3 scribes, there was a machloket. Was it 2 or 3? So this is the main position, which is 2 scribes. So if it's clear they're innocent, then they just release, if let's say the facts were wrong or something like that, they release them from court. Otherwise, they take a vote. We're going to give a whole bunch of possibilities. 12, we're going to remember there's 23. 12 say innocent, 11 guilty, zakai, person's innocent. But if it's the opposite, and 12 say guilty, 11 say innocent, we already know this, right? That doesn't work because you need a majority of 2. Or you could have 11, and one says, I don't know. Or these are all going to be cases where, since we can't convict, we're going to have to do something else. Okay, even if you have 22, say the person's guilty, and you have a way majority of, right? You have a unanimous, except what's the problem? One of them said, I don't know, and wouldn't vote. One abstained. If you have anyone abstaining and you're down to 22, you can't rule the case. So what do you have to do? Yosifu hadayanim. You add judges to the panel. Okay, so if one person says, I don't know, or you can't get a majority of 2 to convict, then we start adding judges. And what do? We add, how do we add them? Shnayim, shnayim. We keep adding 2 at a time. And if we keep having the same problem, we have to keep adding, keep adding, keep adding. Ad shivim ve'echad. Okay, you go up until, right, you don't have to. You could just add 2, but you get to 71. Now, if one person abstained, you have a strange case here because you're going to end up with an even number of judges, which is weird. And we've talked about that in the past. Why do we add them as pairs then? You would think maybe just add to get up to the number 23. Why would you add in pairs and end up with 24 and then you have an even number, which we don't really want? So it seems that there was this thing of adding in pairs, that judges come in pairs, and that because of that, you can't just add one judge. You have to add the judge with a pair. It's a hard concept to understand, but you have to realize that there must have been some sort of concept of judges go in pairs, and that's because we want to have, the person in the counter, right? We want to have the deliberation, so we always add them in pairs. Shloshim v'shisham zakin. Now, when you got to 71, shloshim v'shisham zakin or shloshim v'chamisham v'chayvim zakai. Okay, so obviously, if you're going to say 36, say you're innocent, 35, say you're guilty, we're going to say you're innocent. But, or the person's innocent, shloshim v'shisham v'chayvim or shloshim v'chamisham zakin. What if you get to this point where you added, and you still can't get to, right? This would obviously be a case where no one abstained, and you have exactly 71, and you have 36 and 35, and you don't have a majority of 2. So what do? Danim elu keneged elu ad shireh echad min hachayvim divrei hamazakim. You basically continue people talking, deliberating until someone convinces and moves them onto the other side. Which side? To say innocent. Now, of course, this doesn't mean what if they convince them to say chayav? So you could do that too. Okay. If they did that, then you'd have 2 to obligate to say the person's guilty, and the person would be guilty and killed. But here we see again, the Mishnah really wants to get to the agenda of innocent. So again, the Mishnah is just bringing the example. Like I said, this is a descriptive Mishnah. They're just describing a scenario where this could happen and saying, and then the person would be innocent. But, there you would have to have, until you have 2 people would have to move over, right? You had Shloshim v'chamisham zakim, right? And 36, so you would have to move over 2 people to have a majority. But if you could get the majority, then that would work. Okay. Right. I guess you would move someone over, so then it would work. It would flip. Yeah, that would flip. Okay. You'd only need to move one, because then the person wouldn't be on that side. They'd be on that side. Okay. But it would work also if you could convince one of the people to go the other way and you'd have a majority of 2 to convict, then you would convict also. It just doesn't bring that case because that's not where the Mishnah wants you to go. Okay. That was a long Mishnah. Now we're going to get to the Gemara. The first question we're going to deal with, which is going to take most of the daf, is where do we get to this number 7? Okay, how do we get to 7 chakirot? So for this, we're going to quote 3 verses, which I brought on your sheet. Okay, the verses are, let me just pull up the study guide. Okay, the verses are this. We have 3 verses. One about Ir Hanidacha, which is a city that all go to worship idols. One is by an individual who worships Avodah Zarah, who worships idols, right, as opposed to a whole city. And one is about Idim Zomimim. Okay, and in all these psukim, we're going to see very similar words. Vidara, okay, it's you can look on the sheet to see where they are. I'm not going to tell you all the details now. We'll never finish. But vidarashta b'chakar, they're all in Sefer Dvarim. Vidarashta b'chakarta v'sha'alta hetev. Okay, you're going to check and ask and ask in all 3 words. Darashta chakarta sha'alta hetev, very well. You're going to ask well. Asking well is considered one question, because asking well is if you just ask, to ask is really not, like lidrosh and lachkor are strong words. Sha'alta, to ask, is not really a word unless you put it together with hetev. So we're going to have darashta, chakarta, sha'alta, hetev. That's 3. In the next pasuk, we have v'ugad l'cha b'shamata, you're going to hear, and then v'darashta hetev, and you're going to check into it very well. Here, darashta is 1. You don't really need hetev, because darashta already means well. So darashta is 1, hetev is 2. So that gets you another 2. And in Idim Zomimim, it says, V'darshu hashoftim hetev. Again, you have darashta hetev. So we're going to add another 2. That gets you to 7. Okay, so here you see it on the chart. I messed up one thing. I just need to move hetev to the second line. I'll fix that after class. Okay, so we have these are the seven. So now the Gemara says, I'm a Rav Yehuda, so they're going to quote Rav Yehuda. I want you to pay attention to this because the second answer they're going to give after they reject answer number one is going to be also in the name of Rav Yehuda. And I think what they're just doing is modifying Rav Yehuda a little bit to fix this problem that we're going to have ultimately. So here he says, the pasuk says, right, darashta v'chakarta v'shalta etev. It says v'darashta etev, and it says v'darshu etev. Okay, and that gets you to seven. That's Amud Aleph. We're now turning to Amud Bet. Ve'em achad achad kativna. Why don't you just say each one has, okay, each one, irani dachat, you need three, avodah zarah, you need two, ed zomim, you need two. Each one is for its own purpose. If not, if you think we have 3, 2, and 2, and it's meant to be altogether 7 for all the cases, well, why didn't the Torah just write it all in one place? And then you would know 7 in that case. And then from there, we would learn to all the other cases. Okay, putting aside the issue that I don't think we have 7 words that could have been used to say this, but let's assume we could deal with that problem. But theoretically, what they're saying is, if you really wanted to say there's 7 chakirot, they should have put them all in one place. So why they do it like this, 3, 2, and 2, it doesn't make any sense. And therefore, that's a question on his position. So the answer, kevan dekulhu behade hadadik tivan, mehadade yalfe. Bahade hadadi means they're all written together. Now, that's not true. I didn't tell you where they are, but they're in different chapters in Sefer Dvarim. But there's an old version of Rashi that says that the language here should be kulu ki hadade. They're all written similar to the others. In other words, the language is very similar. So from there, they're going to say we can learn from one to the other, okay? Because of the similarity in languages. And even the similarity in what it's talking about in the pasuk. The pasuk is something happens and you have to check to make sure this is accurate. So now they say, therefore, it's kiman dichtiv b'chad dami. It's as if they were all written in one place. So the Gemara says, wait, we're going to question the assumption of that answer. That answer was, right, to answer the question, what did we say? They're all written very similarly, right? And they're all kind of similar, and because of that, we can learn one from the other. But they say, v'halo dami la'adade. They're actually not similar to each other. And now we're going to show that each one has some sort of stringency that is not in the other two. And once we show that, what can we say? We can say, okay, so we're going to show, I'll bring back up the sheet. We can show that if irani dachat has a certain stringency, then we could say maybe there we have 3 chakirot that you need. But, right, maybe in other cases you need more. And maybe there you only need 3. The more strict it is, this is interesting, the more likely, in other words, the more severe the transgression is, the more likely that we'll say, oh, you know what? This was so severe what you did. We'll let it go and we'll punish you even though we had less chakirot. So maybe there's a magic number of something else, but this one only needs 3, or this one only needs 2, or this one only needs 2 because, okay, that's our concept. So now let's see it played out. And the siman is palat sayif hatra. Those are the 3 ways in which each one is more strict than the other. Irani dachat lahanaftarti lo damya. Okay, irani dachat is different from the other 2. Shekem mamono palat. In the other 2, the mammon is not punished. The property of anyone is not punished. We're in this chart down here. Irani dachat mamono gam ne'enach. Okay, in irani dachat, you not only punish the people of the city, but you destroy, you burn all the property in the city. So it's got a unique, strict stringency that all the property gets destroyed, punished as well. Avodah zarah, an individual who worships idols, la'anachtarti lo dam yeshkem b'sayif, because the one who worships avodah zarah gets stoned, and everyone else gets, right, the other punishment here, that's the death penalty is only sayif, it's only by the sword. Edim zomimim lahanachtarti lo damya shekain tzrichim hatra'ah. Edim zomimim are different because all the others need to be warned before they get punished, but this person doesn't need, the Eid Zomim doesn't get warned. It's a unique exception to the rule that you don't have to warn the Eidim Zomim. You know you're going to get this punishment that you're going to get Kasher Zamam. We don't warn Eidim Zomim. We consider them forewarned. Everybody knows you can't lie falsely and, and that the punishment is Kasher Zamam. Nobody warns you before you do it. There's a whole question why. We'll get to that much later. Okay, so now we see if each one has its own unique Chumrah. Okay, so we started with the answer of Rabbi Yehuda. We get to 7 from all these words. We then said, But maybe, if you really wanted to learn 7, you should have put them all in one place. I said, well, since they're all written similarly, we can learn one from the other because they're all similar to each other. But they're not all similar to each other, we just said. Each one has a chumrah that the other two don't have, which again, if it has a chumrah, we might say, maybe there you can suffice with less bedikot, but maybe you need in the other place more. So now they say, okay, so we have to learn it some other way. So now we're going to have a different resolution. It's not because they were similar to each other, because they're not. So the answer is, we're going to learn it from Gzera Shava. Hetev, hetev. So in all of these, it says hetev, hetev, right? All three had the word hetev. Okay, shalta hetev, darash hetev, darshu hetev. Okay, and therefore we're going to learn Gzera Shava one to the other. So if this says 3 and that says 2 and that says 2, we're going to learn each one to the other, and we're going to get to a total of 7. And they point out, though, this has to be Gzera Shava mufne. De'ilo mufne, if it's not mufne, what does that mean? The word has to be unnecessary. If the word hetev wasn't unnecessary in all these places, then what could we do? We could question the Gzera Shava. Remember the rules of Gzera Shava? Number 1, it has to be a tradition. You have a tradition, there's Gzera Shava. Number 2, it has to be something that you can't contradict with logic, unless the word is totally unnecessary. If the word is needed in the pasuk and you want to darshan in Gzera Shava, that'll only work if there's no logical knockout. But here we have a logical knockout. We just said this one's strict in that way, this one's strict in that way, that one's strict in that way. So if it weren't for the fact that that word is unnecessary, then we'd be able to knock out the Gzera Shava. So we now have to prove that the word is really unnecessary, and in each place. It's not going to be so simple. So they basically say it has to be mufne, di'ilo mufne. If it wasn't available and free to darshan, ikal mifrach, we could knock it out. So the Gemara says, yeah, lie. Really, it's true. Afnuya mufne. It is unnecessary. Why? If you wanted to say 2 things, you should have said darshu v'chakru. Okay? And shani krabadiburei behetev. Instead of saying darshu and chakru, okay, this is obviously only in 2 of the cases. In one of the cases it did say chakru, but in one of the cases it says darshu etev, in the other case it said v'darash etev. Okay, so in those 2 places it should have said v'darshu v'chakru if they wanted to say drisha, and right, if they wanted to add 2 ways of questioning. To use the word hetev, right? Hetev means better, right? Higher quality, not necessarily more. But if you're using hetev to mean more, which here it means darshu and hetev are 2 separate chakirot, then that's already a different use of the word. Okay, so shani krab dibure behetev shmamina lafnuye. But they said akata mufne mitzad chadu. This only works in one direction. Now it really means 2. It means 2 out of 3, because bishlam hanach tarte mufneu mishum davele lemichtav. You should have said chakru, but irani dacha mahavele lemichtav haktiva kulu. It already said, okay, vidarshu. Sorry, let me find the pasuk. Vidarashta v'chakarta v'shalta hetev. It used all the languages. There was no extra language to have added. The only way to add another one was to say sha'alta hetev, right? There was no other way to say it because we already used darshu, we already used chakru. So how are you going to answer that? That one's not really unnecessary, which means, again, we're going to knock out the Gzera Shava because of the earlier question. So now they say, Hatam nami afnuyim mufne. No, that really is unnecessary. It's a word that you could have used something else, because if you wanted to show more, you could have done it like this. You could have used a double language for the drisha or a double language for the chakira, and then you could have added without the word hetev. So in the end, we prove all the hetevs are extra. So this seems to be good for now, but I already told you we're going to knock out Rav Yehuda, so wait. Right? So again, they say darosh tidrosh or chakor tichor, and therefore shani krabadibure behetev shmami na lafnuye. And the fact that they decided instead of saying darosh tidrosh chakor tichor, they used hetev. It means hetev is that use of that word. It's not right. It also adds, and it's also unnecessary because it could have used a different word instead of that. And from that, we can also darshan the Gzera Shava. Right? It's used both for the numbering, right, to get to 7, and it's used for both because of how it's worded. But now we have an issue, because this taught us Irani Dachat, it taught us Avodah Zarah, it taught us Edim Zomimim. What about everything else? Well, Atum Nechnakim b'chavachomer miniskalim ragim. Okay, strangulation you could learn from a kavachomer from niskalim ragim. In other words, an Eid Zomim who testified in a murder case, they would get the punishment of saif, also, or hereg as we call it, which is by the sword. Also the Irani Dachat, you get killed by saif. Niskalim is the case of Oved Avodah Zarah. So Niskalim and Naragim, or at least Niskal, is stronger than, actually they're both stronger than Chenek. They're both more severe than Chenek. So we can learn from a Kavachomer. if those require 7 and they're stricter, then obviously in a less strict case, we're going to require 7. Because remember, what was our logic? If it's so strict, we might even suffice with less chakirot because we want to kill this person for doing something so severe. So since skila and hereg is more severe than chenek, at least according to most opinions, skila for sure is more strict than chenek. Strangulation, there's a machloket about hereg and chenek, but at least we have skila to cover it, either which way. Va'atu nisrafim b'chavachomer miniskalim. And the burning, those who deserve death by burning, that you'll learn zera shava from skila. But that only works if you think, and this is a machloket we're going to see later on, that skila, usually we say skila streifa hereg b'chenek, that's the order. But there's a machloket about it. Rabbi Shimon thinks it's a different order. So hanicha Rabbanan, this works according to the rabbis, damar skila chamura, and then we learn for everything else by kal v'chomer. But ela Rabbi Shimon damar streifa chamura ma'ika lamemar. But if you think that burning is more severe, then you don't have a kal v'chomer, and then how would you learn burning? Maybe burning would be less. We'd need less chakirot. So they say ela. So because of that, we're going to reject Rabbi Yehuda, and we're going to have to reread Rabbi Yehuda differently. Ela amar Rabbi Yehuda. This is what he said. You notice in 2 of the psukim it says, and in fact it was true. Now it says it's true and correct. Okay, if you translate literally, truth and correct. So those are also unnecessary words, and they appear in 2 of the verses. So what are we going to say? So we already had 7, right? All those words. Now we got another 4. So now we have 11. You can look at the chart again on the sheet. Sheva, the Sheva chakirot, 7 for each of the chakirot. Dal tlat l'gzera shava. Take out 3 heitevs. We now added emet and nachon added to the list. They're another 4, but they're really only another 3. We take out the heitev. Now is for gzera shava only. Okay, we don't learn chakirot from there, and now we're left with 1 extra. Pashaluchad, one of the, let's say, nachon is left. Okay, what do we do with that extra one? The Rabbi Shimon la'atuye nisrafin. For Rabbi Shimon, that 11th one is going to teach us. From here, you learn to also cases that are more strict, like nisrafim. And the Rabbanan, what are we going to say? What does the rabbis do with the 11th? Well, even though you could learn nisrafim from a kal v'chomer, it's better if you just learn it from a pasuk. And that's what we do with the 11 words that we can darshan. In the second option, instead of 7 words we're darshaning, we add to 11. We get it up to 11. 3 of the extras used for the gzera shava, to learn from one to the other. And the extra one is learned for the nisrafim. Megadif for Rabbi Yavau. Rabbi Yavau says, wait, you're taking the extra one, you're learning it for something else? Like you're saying it teaches from here to the nisrafim? Why don't we just say, maybe it's just adding another one to the list, and we really have 8 chakirot. To which the Gemara says, Shmona chakirot mika, whoever heard of 8 chakirot? To which I say, what do you mean? Alam alo, why not? Here, we're going to show you. You could say what part of the hour? Was it half an hour into the hour? Was it a third into the hour? And Tanya Nami Hachi, if you don't believe me that there's such a thing, here's a braita. There's a braita that says there's shmona chakirot. So now we're going to get back to what I mentioned earlier about how much do people confuse hours and stuff? How much do they make mistakes? So you could suggest that there's a chakirah, which again, if you contradict, you're out, about this difference of are you halfway into the hour or was it, let's say, at the start of the hour? According to one version of Abaye, the way he explains Rabbi Meir, the way he explains Rabbi Meir, Da'amar ein adam to'ev lo klum, ulahach lishana da'amar adam to'eh mashu shapir. Okay, so we're going to say, if you say people don't make mistakes, right, and it's just that one said 2 and one said 3, they were just talking about the same thing, but they don't make mistakes, makes sense to ask half hour on the half hour or not. And there, the one who says he's to'eh a little bit, a little before, a little after, you could have like a discrepancy of 5-10 minutes. Still half an hour would be a relevant question. Adam But if the way Abaye said, leave it to Rabbi Yehuda, that person could make a mistake of half an hour, or Rava, who explained the Rabbi Meir is the Tanakama there in our Mishnah, or the Rava that says people make bigger mistakes than that, like up to an hour off, it would be no point of having a chakira of the half hour because people err in that, and therefore it's not a question that you can knock out a witness based on that. So that doesn't make any sense. So what do they answer? A very odd answer. Where are we up to in the Jubilee year cycle? To which they said, Hainu be'ez Shavua. We already asked that question. What year in the Jubilee cycle are we up to? Which cycle of Shemitas are we up to? So they say, no, what we mean is be'ez Yovel. Which 50-year bunch are we in? Okay, besides saying which Shemitah year of the Jubilee, counting up to the Jubilee, which Jubilee are we talking about? Which means basically you want to clarify that you're testifying about something that happened within these 50 years and not the previous 50 years, which would be crazy. Why would someone even be thinking of testifying about that? So it's a stretch of an answer, but okay. The idach, what would Rabbi Yehuda say? Why don't you need that eighth hakira? Okay, you would just say, obviously, you don't need that. It's not important. It's not going to be relevant. Okay, so what we did here is we came up with how do we get the 7 chakirot? How do we know we learn from there to other cases? For that, we needed the second explanation of Rabbi Yehuda that got to 11 things to darshan in the pasuk, and one was extra, and that taught to other cases. Okay, and then we have Rabbi Abau's question about the 8th, and we end up with these two approaches, either 8 or not. Rabbi Yosi Omer. Now we're going to see the machloka between Rabbi Yosi and the rabbis. Tanya Amar Lahem Rabbi Yosi lechachamim. L'divrechem mishabava Amar emesh harago. Omer lo be'ezeh shavua be'ezeh shah be'ezeh chodesh b'kama b'chodesh. Because you can't say there's always 7 chakirot, because it could be someone came and said this happened yesterday. If it happened yesterday, you're not going to start asking them which year of the Shemitah cycle are you talking about, which year of this, which month. It doesn't make a difference. So Amrulo, they said to him, wait. According to you, mishabava Omer achshav harago. What if someone comes and says now the person killed? What? You don't need those questions either, according to you. If a case would happen where someone said right now, you wouldn't even need what day. It's obvious it's today. So because they asked that question, they say the following. Even though you don't need it, we add it anyway. In other words, some cases it might not be a relevant question, but we ask it anyway. Like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says somewhere else. Hachanami, likewise, we're going to say the same thing. In other words, just like I could say to you, if they said today you wouldn't need all your questions, so likewise, if they said yesterday and you wouldn't need all my questions, we're still going to have them. So hachanami, likewise by me, right? And according to our interpretation, afagav delot tzarich ramina like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Okay, Rabbi Yosi, what's he going to say? Emesh harago shachiach b'rovei duyot. Shav harago lo shachiach b'rovei duyot. The question the rabbis asked Rabbi Yosi was about a case where someone came to court and said, right now, I just saw someone. So we already know the place. We already know the time. We know everything. So Rabbi Yosi says that's such a rare case that would happen. People don't usually come to the court immediately. They'll come maybe the next day. And then, again, if they come the next day, that renders the rabbi's questions unnecessary, but doesn't render Rabbi Yosi's questions unnecessary. And therefore, he says, I don't think that's you asked me a question from a case that just never really happens. Okay, last thing for today. Mikirim atemoto, Tanu Rabbanan. Mikirim atemoto, Nochri harag, Yisrael harag. Here we have an expansion on the Mishnah in this Braita. Do you recognize him? Did he kill? Was it a Jew he killed or was it a Gentile he killed? Hitraitimbo, did you warn the person, the murderer? Kibel alavatra, hitirat smolamitad. Did the person say, yes, I heard your warning, and yes, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway, and knowingly that they're going to get the death penalty? Only then can you convict them. Hemit b'tok kedei dibor. Did he kill immediately after you said the warning? Because if not, we say maybe he forgot already, and maybe he did it not on purpose, right? He didn't realize what the ramifications of his actions were. These are two different elilim, two different idols. Did he slaughter? Did he offer incense? Did he pour a libation? Or did he bow down? These are 4 ways they will worship idols. So you have to get those facts straight. Those are important facts. Again, we had a deliberation. Are these chakirot or are they bedikot? Okay, we'll stop here. We'll start this whole sugya of Ula's question. Where do we get hatra'ah from the Torah? I already put the chart in the sheet. So if I don't make a sheet for tomorrow, you can look back at today's with the sheet of the 4 opinions that most of them are on tomorrow's daf anyway. Okay, so we started with 7 chakirot. We spent most of the Gemara discussing how did these 7 chakirot, what is the source for them? And then we got to what's the debate between Rabbi Yosi and the rabbis. You need only 3 or 7, and this deliberation they had between them. And then this issue of Mikirim Matemoto and the expansion of the next set of things in the Mishnah of questions you would ask in particularly unique cases, which again, we didn't know where to put them under bedikot chakirot, or maybe they're in a 3rd category of drishot, which aren't even mentioned in the Mishnah, which again would be a little strange, but those are all ways of dealing with that difficulty in the Mishnah. And then we discussed the rest of the Mishnayot of the whole process and how it goes and how we determine and who can say what. And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a good week.